Before my family rooted itself at the Struzina family farm, my parents actually built a beautiful, brand new house in an up-and-coming estate on the ever-sprawling and extending margins of town. This area, that was once all farmland, was quickly being transformed into new, shiny housing developments. Gone were the fields of neatly planted corn rows, replaced with stucco front Spanish Revival homes, trimmed with sprawling green lawns, twig-like crepe myrtle trees, and neatly manicured flower beds. Our street was the first street to be built and completed, so when we moved in, there were only a few other families in the neighborhood. Kind of like a reverse ghost town. We made fast and still-lasting friendships with our neighbors. It was an exciting and special time. A new neighborhood, new house, new friends, new. I had just started the 8th grade and was just about old enough to start babysitting, which was great because our neighbors on the left-hand side had 5 girls. And when the 2 older ones were busy with sports or academics, I got to step in and earn a few bucks. One of the neighbor girls was actually my age, and we became fast friends. We would have slumber parties, scary movie nights. We'd stay up late watching rented DVDs from Blockbuster, eating junk food and painting our nails outrageous shades of lime green or emo black. Every now and then, we could get in trouble for being up too late or chatting too loud or screeching from a jump scare in one of the movies. But on the whole, we were super well-behaved kids. One night, however, as we were sat in the living room chatting about boys and the upcoming summer vacation, my friend's mom came bounding into the living room. Her pink terry cloth robe wrapped around her haphazardly, her blonde curls a tumbling mess, and her eyes were sunken and exhausted. She was mad. We could feel her frustration. She was already chastising us before she even came fully into the room. "It is way too loud, girls. You have got to stop screaming." My friend and I sat there, staring at her mother wide-eyed. We hadn't been screaming. The TV wasn't even on. We were just sitting there, quietly sharing secrets. We couldn't even respond. We were so confused. And as her mother took full appraisal of the situation, she just shook her head, murmured an apology, and went back to bed. We never spoke about it again. It was just a weird mom moment, no big deal. As June rapidly approached, so did graduation season. The neighbor's eldest daughter was graduating high school, and the mom, dad, and eldest 3 girls would be attending the ceremony. But I had been lined up to look after the 2 smallest children. It was an easy job. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for dinner, brush teeth, and then into bed. By 7, I was sitting on the couch reading a book. I remember it as though it were yesterday. Every image, every feeling so vivid. There I sat, reading a young adult fantasy novel, when all of a sudden, the energy in the living room felt charged. The lighting seemed a little different, and the space felt fuller. I thought one of the little girls had gotten out of bed, so I looked up from my book, and as I did, a man with pale skin, butterscotch chin-length hair, clad in a white gown, sprinted from one end of the house across the space beyond the living room and down the hall. He was so bright, so tall, and had bare feet that never touched the ground. I remember thinking that his dress looked just like a white burial shroud. He wasn't wispy or translucent. He was dense, flesh and blood, athletic even. I was astounded. I replayed it over and over again in my mind. A tall, fair, shoeless man just ran, floated, darted across the house. He came from a solid wall and disappeared into nothingness. I never told the neighbor family. That is, until a few weeks later. We went to Magic Mountain together, and on the drive home, the eldest daughter began to complain that she didn't want to go back to the house. She didn't want to see the man again. I couldn't help it. I just blurted out, "What man?" She proceeded to state that while sitting on the couch one quiet night, she had an experience nearly identical to mine. As I told her my story, I could see her parents exchanging glances in the rearview mirror. By the end of the summer, the family moved house. Not because of the ghost, but rather a change of job. But as they were leaving, the parents became very candid with us older girls. They told us that since moving into the house, they had been suspicious and alarmed by some unexplainable activity. It all began with the AC. Their dad had the house set at a constant 65 degrees. Now, this is very rare for Bakersfield, California, where the heat is extreme and the houses are big. But he had one rule. No one touches the thermostat, and this house will never hit 66 degrees. Except it did. All the time. Someone, something was touching the thermostat. Next came the cries in the night. The mom would wake to the sounds of weeping. She would go to check on her children, but everyone would be fast asleep. Their doorknob would rattle and turn. They assumed it was one of the little kids, but when they got up to check, all they would find would be an empty hallway. Her mother then brought up the slumber party where we were supposedly shouting in the living room. We began to profess over and over again that it wasn't us, and she slowly nodded and agreed. She said that there were many nights that the couple heard ruckus from that room. But it was so loud, it was so undeniable that they never knew what was real or not. That is, until they came out to check and would find a quiet space. No one ever told the next family who moved in, and we moved to the farm a few months later. But I'll never forget that house. Not because it was spooky, old, or dark, but because it wasn't. It was so bright, so fresh, so clean, so new. It was clear that whatever was going on in that house had nothing to do with the house itself. It couldn't. And that's the thing about hauntings. Sometimes it's not the structure you see today. It's the land it's built upon that's spirited. But regardless of the hows or the whys, I will never forget sitting crisscross applesauce on the sofa and watching a man from a grave run through my friend's family home. Hey friends, it's Becca. For the past 5 years, the West London Witch team has been dedicated to bringing you the best supernatural stories at the highest studio quality. And by team, I mean me and my buddy Danny. We do this work totally for free because we love it. We're proud of our content, and appreciate the wonderful interactions we get to have with storytellers and listeners just like yourself. If you're enjoying the West London Witch, maybe consider joining our Patreon. It's a way to further engage with us and show your support for two creatives. If you're in a position to spare enough each month for us to grab a cup of coffee in between edits or add to the piggy bank for a new microphone, we would love to see you in our Patreon community. But I know times are tough, so if you're not in a position to join Patreon right now, that's okay. We aren't going anywhere. Head on over to patreon.com/The West London Witch. For as little as £1, $1, €1 a month, you can gain full access to our coven, a space where we share behind-the-scenes stories, dive deeper into each episode, answer your questions, and have special little treats to thank you for sharing your love and kindness with your favorite little witch. Hello and welcome to episode 107 of The West London Witch, a podcast where we share stories about those moments where we find ourselves very much not alone. The very first episode of The West London Witch tells the story of my own family's experience in our haunted house. It's a story that over 3 decades later we still talk about. You see, you can move out of a haunted house, but those experiences will haunt you forever. Home is the place where one should feel the most at ease, the safest, the most relaxed. So when you share that space with the dead, it can be deeply unsettling to say the least. Today, paranormal researcher Sadie has come to tell us all about her very average and very normal childhood home that was plagued with highly abnormal activity. I'm Rebecca Strazina, and this is The West London Witch, episode 107, The Haunting of Burwell House.
So I have a lot of people ask me, as someone that is well-versed and very interested in the paranormal, what's the scariest thing that you've ever experienced? What's the spookiest place that you've ever been to? And truthfully, my answer is always my childhood home. I grew up in a small village in East Cambridgeshire, in a village called Burwell. To know, I think, the story of the house, you have to kind of get a feel for the village. It has history dating back to Anglo-Saxon times and potentially even older. There's a lot of surrounding villages that have evidence of Roman settlements, such as Exning. So Exning was actually the first village that I ever lived in. I lived in a small council house with my mum and dad. And one of the oldest stories that my mum still likes to say to this day is I would sit in the corridor where the staircase was and speak to a lady at the top of the stairs. That is how she would phrase it. But being as young as I do, really, the story comes from my mum, and she would say, the house was a very warm house, the heating worked great, but that the entrance corridor that had the staircase in it was always ice cold. And when I, began being able to use my language, and my mum would ask me, can you describe this person that you're talking to at the top of the stairs? The kind of style and fashion era would sound quite descriptive of the Victorian period. I used to speak to a lady that had, a great big petticoat, coat skirt and bodice. And so that's really where it started.
Sadie, her mom, dad, and older sister lived in this home until her younger brother joined the gang. The family needed a bigger space, and they ended up in Burwell.
The house that we were in was just a council house. It wasn't a very old house either. I believe that the houses we were in, the cul-de-sac, was built around the 60s. So not particularly old period buildings, quite new. But the history of Burwell is quite old. And anyone that lives somewhat locally knows a lot of the stories.
One of those famous stories that I simply have to share with you is that of a catastrophic incident that occurred in 1727. On the evening of September 8th, an exciting attraction rolled into the sleepy village of Burwell. A traveling puppet show had come to town and had rented out a local barn to house the event. The entire town was abuzz with excitement, and townsfolk flocked to the barn for the very reasonably priced show. Spectator after spectator crammed into the barn, and soon, well over 100 eager audience members were assembled. Soon the barn was so full, the doors were actually nailed shut in order to prevent anyone else from gaining access. This short-term solution led to a horrendous, deadly consequence. A man named Richard Whittaker, who worked for the owner of the barn, had tried to gain entry to the show for free, but he was turned away. Not one to miss out on the fun, Richard snuck into the stable and climbed into the hayloft so he could watch the show from above. In his hand, he held a lit lantern. Now, fire and haylofts are not a winning combination. And sadly, it wasn't long before the hay was set ablaze. As you can imagine, sheer horror and panic ensued. An excerpt from the parish registers of Burwell reads, "At about 9 o'clock on the evening of September 8th, 1727, fire broke out in a barn, in which a great number of persons were met together to see a puppet show. In the barn were a great many loads of new light straw. The barn was thatched with straw, which was very dry, and the inner roof was covered with old, dry cobwebs, so that the fire, like lightning, flew around the barn in an instant. There was but one small door, which was closed, nailed up, and could not easily be broken down. When it was opened, the passage was so narrow, and everybody was so impatient to escape, that the door was presently blocked up. And most of those that did escape, which was but very few, were forced to crawl over the bodies of those that lay in a heap by the door." 76 people died in the fire, and sadly, 2 more audience members succumbed to their injuries 2 days later. Richard Whittaker was charged for setting the fire. However, he was later acquitted. The victims of this tragic event were buried in the local St. Mary's churchyard and are remembered with a commemorative stone of a burning heart framed with angel wings, a moving memorial for a truly harrowing disaster.
It's got a very rich history, and it's got quite a spooky history as well. And that kind of lays the basis and for the house, for our childhood home.
Now, Sadie's family were not opposed to the dark and scary aspects of life. As a family, they would watch horror movies together, and Sadie's dad loved a good scary movie night.
We watched these films with vampires and with monsters and with ghosts, and mum and dad would say, well, that's not real, don't allow that to affect your sleep tonight, that's not real. But actually, for us, ghosts were very much real because we experienced them on a daily in our house. It was very commonplace and very normal for us to have something happen every day, and it became so normal that it almost didn't bother us. It just became a normal part of life. So you would go into the kitchen and you might, for example, place your keys on the counter side. You would leave the kitchen, come back moments later, and they'd be somewhere else. It was very normal for things to move. It was also very normal to see things daily. And I think it's interesting because I think we give credit to a lot of children and pets being quite susceptible to the paranormal and to experiencing things. But actually, as a family, all of us experienced strange things.
The activity was so constant and ever-present, it was totally undeniable. Even Sadie's dad, who started out as a skeptic, couldn't deny that this house was different.
I think we also had more than one spirit in the house. I think we had multiple. I don't think it was the building. I think it was probably the land. that could be contributed to the spirits and the energy that moved through this house.
One common occurrence the family experienced were the sounds of children. As soon as the sun went down and the moon rose high within the sky, the house would be filled with the sounds of children giggling and laughing. But as Sadie said, there were multiple spirits in this house, some of which you could actually see with your own two eyes.
There was definitely a shadow figure that was in the house. So this was a spirit in the house that in particular I experienced, and it was with my mum. And I was about 13 years old. And I think because we grew up very used to things happening, most of the time it didn't scare us, but there would be some times in particular that it would be really unnerving. And this is really one of my memories that's imprinted so strongly on me now that even to think of it all these years later, it's like it happened last week. I remember sleeping in the bed with my mum. I remember me and my siblings, we grew up, it was a small house. It was 3-bed, but one of the bedrooms was really a closet, a bit very Harry Potter-ish. So we always had someone else in the room with us, but the rest of the family were out. It was just me and my mum at home. And my mother was a very heavy sleeper. When she started to fall asleep, you couldn't rouse her. She was a bit like a zombie. And I remember looking behind the door, and it was dusk. The sun was going down, so it's very low lighting. And my dad, because it was my mum and dad's room, my dad had a dressing gown hanging on the back of the door. And I remember thinking, it looks like there's a big shadow over there, but it's probably the dressing gown. And then the way that your eyes adjust when it's getting used to lower lighting, I remember seeing my dad's dressing gown hanging on the back of the door, and so very clearly seeing next to it the perfect silhouette of a big man.
Sadie was overcome with not only fear, but with the sickly knowledge that her eyes were not playing tricks on her. There was another person in the room watching her and her mother sleep.
And the feeling as well that I had, obviously, I had this great fear in me as this teenager, but I really felt like someone was watching me as well. It was quite, a strong feeling of I'm being watched. I remember kind of hitting my mum's leg and being like, Mum, please wake up. Mum, there is a man behind the door. And in her tired, half falling asleep stupor, she said, I know there is, just ignore him.
Having her mother confirm the existence of the man was in no way comforting.
I'm absolutely certain that my mum had seen, obviously, this shadow figure before. And it was when I kind of verbalized, I can see a man behind the door. It was very, she very much brushed it off. It was very, oh yeah, I know, just go to sleep, it's fine. Which to me, I definitely would say it's something that she's experienced before, and she knows that it's true and she knows that it's there, and it's, don't worry about it, I know, but no need to allow it to stop you sleeping.
Regardless of the sentiment, Sadie did not sleep that night. She threw the covers over her head, curled up into a ball, and sweat and stressed until the sun came up. However, this wouldn't be the last time that Sadie saw something inexplicable in the house.
It was funny in Burwell House because something might happen that seems really kind of mundane. It doesn't really stand out. There's no reason for it to be particularly scary. But actually, I think, as an avid horror lover, when I watch these moments, especially in supernatural films, or, especially when they are featuring ghosts, it's always the really small, scenes that actually scare me the most. And this memory is one of them, because it really is straight out of a horror film. And it was as simple as this. I was coming from the living room, and then there was a hallway, and that hallway led to the kitchen and the staircase to go upstairs. And I just round the corner of the living room to go into the kitchen, and the thing that I see is, if you were to imagine, if you're stood in a hallway and looking at the entrance of a doorway on either the left or right, and somebody walks through that doorway, the last thing that you might see of them would be the back end or the heel of their foot as it walks into the room. And that's what I saw. And I remember seeing the heel of someone's foot just go into the kitchen. And I followed it round, again, completely unassuming, not scary at all. I'm just imagining that it's one of my family members. And then there's no one in the kitchen.
This may have been a simple and subtle experience, but I agree with Sadie. Sometimes it is the small things that are the most chilling. But like Sadie said, no one in the house was immune from ghostly experiences. Every single family member has their own stories that rocked them individually.
My older sister, Courtney, she's 5 years older. And because she was the oldest sibling, she was the one that ended up breaking free from having to share a bedroom. And she ended up with the box room we call it, the Harry Potter cupboard room. I mean, it was the 90s. And so something that was really big in the 90s, it was like a kind of a makeshift door that you would put in replacement of an actual solid door. And it was like a fly catcher. It's to stop flies coming in. You'd see them on kitchen doors, coffee shops, places like that. But for some reason in the late 90s, they were a really big fashion accessory just in houses as well. And so my sister had one of those. It was too hot to have her normal door shut, so it was permanently open, but she wanted privacy as a teenager. And so she had this kind of mesh. Sometimes they were beaded and sometimes they were just plastic. And she had one of the plastic ones. And so obviously it's not a solid door. And because of her age gap as well, my sister finished school at times that differed from me and my brother. So a lot of times my sister would finish school and we would come after that. So she was home one day, sitting on her bed relaxing, and something made this curtain blow. And through it, because it's obviously not solid, she could see the silhouette of a young girl walk past, who she assumes to be me. And her first instinctual reaction is, Sadie, what are you doing home from school? You shouldn't be home. So she gets up, with her authoritative older sister brain cap on and comes out to tell me off for being home. And there's no one in the house.
Courtney's experience was unsolicited and unexpected. But as Sadie and her brother got older, they couldn't resist poking the bear.
There was one time when me and my brother taunted the ghost. And this is, again, when me and my brother were sharing a room and we were talking about the ghost, again, as normal as anything else. Oh, I wonder if we could get it to do this. And it was the first time that we'd ever, taunted it. But I think we were just being, cheeky teenagers and we were just like pushing the boundaries and seeing, what could come of it. Oh, and wouldn't it be funny if we could get it to do this? And wouldn't it be funny if we could get it to knock on the window and flash the light? And keep in mind, our bedroom was on the first floor. So it's a good 10 feet up. And something knocks on the window from the outside, which isn't possible. It's not possible, not unless you have a ladder. Bang, 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 knocked on the window and the light flashed. The light bulb flashed as well. And me and my brother, absolutely terrified, looked at each other and in the same instant ran downstairs. And I'm talking thundering down the stairs, so much so that my mum and dad were going, what the bloody hell is going on? Because we've made such a ruckus running down the stairs. And we got into the lounge and they were like, what's going on? What's the matter? And we said, we taunted the ghost and it knocked on the window and it made the light flash. And again, very matter of fact, very calm, Mum and Dad said, well, don't taunt the ghost. You know that it's real.
Of course, this is a rather sweet story of kids being kids. And it's easy to say don't torment the ghosts. But even Sadie's parents had moments that really shook their understanding of the world around them.
So in the cul-de-sac we lived in, the cul-de-sac was circular, the houses somewhat faced each other. And at the end of our cul-de-sac, we had a scout hut. Brownies scout huts, again, very big in the 90s. And as kids, my parents used to smoke in the house. And we got together as siblings one day and we said, we are fed up of going to school and smelling like cigarettes. Like, tonight's the night we're going to say to Mum and Dad, no more smoking in the house. And I remembered this night. And so we got together and had this, intervention as siblings and kind of said to mum and dad, right, we're kicking you out. You're not smoking in the house anymore. We don't want to go to school smelling. And they said, absolutely, fair enough, fair enough, which was great because it could have been received any number of ways. But actually, they were really understanding. And that was the last day that they smoked in the house. So from then on, they smoked outside. And mum and dad, I remember them both telling us this story about standing outside smoking, and they're chatting amongst themselves. And then all of a sudden, the whole air to the atmosphere just changed. It felt heavy, almost like when you step into a room after someone's argued and you really can sense the tension in the air. And they said that the whole air to the place just changed. Now, given in my, they're stood outside smoking, they're in a cul-de-sac. So it's quite a big area, to observe the whole atmosphere having, a tangible change to it. And they said that you could visibly see this dark cloud moving from the scout hut down the road. And it didn't have a form to it. There was no particular shape. It was almost like smoke, but it was black and it was big. It took up a big area. And they said that it moved from the scout hut and went past the house. And as it went past the house, they said that the feeling that they both felt in their chest that was very overwhelming was that of sadness. They said this dark, sad cloud moved past the house and then just dissipated as it got down the road. And again, that was another experience that they both felt was paranormal to whatever degree. And it's just one of those, difficult to explain things, but that was very much real to them when they experienced it.
The activity was so diverse and constant that there were things that the family just grew accustomed to or chose to ignore. But then there were those experiences that really stood out above the rest.
There was another time. So this was the only time. And I mean, we were so used to experiences at this point. They've been happening for years. But the only time that there was ever an experience with the paranormal that was physical, we were sat around watching a family film, which is something that we did often once a week. My dad would rent a film from Blockbuster and we'd watch a family film together. And we're all sat, lamps are off, in the dark, enjoying the movie, really, immersed into it. And my dad jumps out of his skin, and really yelps and jumps out of the chair. And obviously all of our consciousness is drawn, to Dad, what's happened? And he says, something just scratched me. And he puts the lamp on that's next to the couch. And sure enough, as clear as day, 3 scratches, perfect nail marks. And the indentation and the way that the skin swells immediately once you've scratched it. It was the only occasion it ever happened. But it was interesting to see, it was always different. And just when you thought you might be able to have an idea of what to expect, or it would change and it would be different.
After hearing this story, I had to ask Sadie if the family had ever considered cleansing the house. I would not be okay with a physical attack occurring in my living room.
So that's a very good question, because I think as an adult now, cleansing would be the first thing that I would go to. I would think there's residual energy here, there's, something's here, and perhaps we can change that. As I think as children, we didn't think to do it, and our parents didn't either. I think it's not that, I just don't think they had the tools then. I think now they'd have the know-how, because we would have guided them to using different tools that might help with something like that. But at the time, I don't think that, either my mum or dad would have thought to have done something like that.
However, on the other hand, it may have been a positive thing that the family did not cleanse or alter the energy in the home.
There is one last thing that I'll share with you. The only reason that I don't share this story when I'm talking specifically about kind of the paranormal side of the house is that I think it's too broad to be able to put it down to anything in particular. But we had a house fire And it was quite a devastational house fire. And we had two rescue cats called Tom and Jerry, and they needed a vet's appointment that day. I think that they'd had some sort of nasal infection. They needed a checkup. My sister had already finished school. So my brother and sister, me and my brother would have been in school. My sister would have been at home. And typically, my mum and sister would have had a lie-in. They're both very much the same now. They'd like to have a lie-in if they ever get the opportunity to do so. And my dad was going to take them to the vet. But I think because they were both worried about the cats, they got out of bed that morning and went with my dad, whereas usually he would have just taken them on his own. And that was the morning that we had the house fire. And as they were driving into Cambridge to go to the vets, fire engines ended up driving past them, and it was multiple. And they said, my mum and dad said to each other, "Oh, that must be a bad one." And as they said that, and as the fire engines were driving past them, the neighbour rang and said, "You've got smoke billowing out of your kitchen window. You might need to come home." And it was our house that was on fire. And after a big investigation, the fire service essentially turned around to mum and dad and said, "We don't know what started the fire," which they're usually able to do. You know, they're quite good with finding the cause for the start of the fire. And it was only really years later that we joked as a family, maybe it was the ghost that started the fire, because the fire service should have been able to give us a finite answer for why we had the house fire, but actually we never got one. They never really knew why it happened. And it's something that we joke about all these years later, that perhaps it was the ghost that started the fire, and perhaps they did have more kind of poltergeist ability than what we ever gave them credit for.
We will never know how the fire started, paranormal or not. And with the lack of physical evidence, sure, maybe it was the ghosts. Stranger things happen at sea, after all. But I had another theory that I wanted to float by Sadie. Sadie, just playing devil's advocate, is there a possibility that the ghosts could have actually made sure that your sister and your mom were up and out of the house in order to keep them out of harm's way?
Oh, maybe. Yeah, there's a good chance, because especially my mom was the kind of person to stay home and say, "No, you guys go, I'll be here when you get back." But they both felt called to go to the appointment for the cats that day. And it's something that all these years later, my mum and dad would say, "Yeah, it was really weird, because usually you guys would have slept in, you wouldn't have come with me, but you did that day." And it just so happened to be that day that the house fire happened.
Needless to say, someone upstairs was looking out for the family. Now, this house was so much more than just a childhood home. It was the house that shaped the entire family's outlook on the world, the beyond, and most importantly, the afterlife.
Over the years, it's something, whenever we get together as a family, we do quiz nights. Whenever we get together for holidays, or we just get together for dinner, one of the main topics of conversation always is Burwell House. And it's because it was such an important time for all of us, but it was also such a eye-opening experience. That house laid the foundation for the belief system that me and my family all have now, which is this very expansive understanding of the world, and that there's more than what meets the eye going on. And my dad used to joke, and he would say, "When I die, I'm going to come back and haunt you all." And we would laugh, and but he meant it. And it's because we all knew as a family, as a collective, that it was possible, that regardless of, other belief systems and religion and different people's opinions on life and death and the afterlife and what comes next, we knew that there was more, even if we couldn't explain how. And we lost our dad in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. And in the strangest way, it actually became this beautiful thing. Losing our dad, losing our parent, as huge as it was and how it turned our world upside down, actually, now, all these years later, 6 years later, which is crazy to believe, it's something that we speak of with such contentment and joy in our heart. And it's because in his death, he has really affirmed what we knew to be true, which is, everything that we just touched upon.
Haunted houses are truly my favorite genre of stories that we share here on the West London Witch. Whether it's a historic stately home, a haunted castle, or a creepy council house tucked away in Cambridgeshire, I am fascinated by houses where the living and the dead coexist side by side. These are truly the moments where we find ourselves very much not alone. Do you have a spooky story you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Drop me an email at thewestlondonwitch@gmail.com or find us on Instagram and Facebook at The West London Witch. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. And come and follow us for additional content on Instagram and Facebook. Until next time, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. The West London Witch is created by me, Rebecca Strazina. Our sound designer and production magician is the incredible Danny Cross. Our theme music was bespokely written and performed by the wickedly talented Kyle Hall. Our cover art is the beautiful collaboration between Lizzie Wilson and Jake Bowser. Special thanks to Miss Sinead Bowers, our quality control and biggest cheerleader. And thank you to you, all of our listeners all over the world. These are your stories. Thank you for sharing them with us.